Let's take another trip back in time. It's 2005. Star Wars The Episode 3 was just released, a website called YouTube was founded, Heelys were a thing, and most importantly, the World of Warcraft was brand new. Not too long ago, I made a video where I read through an old World of Warcraft article from pre-release. Back in 2001 actually, and in a recent video, I expressed my difficulty finding other old reviews and whatnot online, since I think they become collector's items over the years. Well, after I posted that, a cool dude by the name of Drobu sent me a scan he uploaded a while ago of a 2005 review of World of Warcraft, and it has some interesting things in it, so I thought I'd show that to you here. And just in case you get tired of my ramblings and endless tangents, I'll have a link to the description for you to read for yourself. So, this is from the now defunct ComputerGames magazine, actually nearing the end of its lifespan, being shut down 2 years later in March of 2007 after a lawsuit resulting from some email spam of MySpace? Dang, this really was 2007. This issue in particular, though, was published in March of 2005, which is interesting to me because this is exactly when I started playing World of Warcraft myself. I was a few months late to the party, so this will be really cool for me since it's really sort of the state of the game when I finally bit the bullet and joined everyone else in their addiction to the world of Azeroth. So, the game at this point would be about 4 months old, being released in late November. A lot of people are still leveling, and a fair amount have probably started their fun endgame activities. The first Ragnaros kill was recorded in April of 2005, so even the most hardcore guilds hadn't finished the Molten Core yet. As you can see, the highlights in this issue are the new honor system, new instances, battlegrounds, and world events. There's also this crazy new FPS game that's revolutionizing the genre. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. It's called Battlefield 2. We also have Age of Empires 3 and Civilization 4. This is 2005 PC gaming at its finest. What happens when you throw thousands of people into a world and populate it with stuff to do and things to kill? Oh, you know, the typical stuff.
Crushing was fair and serious.
Who the fuck was that? Crush him! What the fuck? Whelps! Left side! Even side! Many whelps! Now!
Each new entry has been met with varying levels of anticipation, but nothing short of Star Wars Galaxies, which is a game that I personally came from, has had the expectations of World of Warcraft. Blizzard isn't redefining the formula for the genre as much as it is working towards perfecting it. World of Warcraft is, by any stretch of the definition, a bog standard, massively multiplayer game. It has all the conventions down pat. Interesting character selection choices with 2 distinct sides, a massive world, lots of interesting things to kill, and lots of motivators to push you to the quote next level, and items you can craft, and tons of amazing loot and quests. So, as you can tell, people had a very high opinion of the game. I think a big reason is because at this point, people were either still working towards, or maybe they just got to the end game. Remember just how long leveling took in vanilla before all of the nerfs, and combine that with the fact that it was the first one for a lot of people, it took us months to level. So there was always something to do at this point for most players. It's just like any expansion, everyone loves it for the first week or two as they're leveling, and then they start running out of stuff to do, and they slowly uncover the various flaws of the game. It's just for Classic, that period of wonder and exploration lasted for like 4 months instead of 2 weeks like how it is today. But, as they said, it won't necessarily convert all players who find MMOs boring or pointless. It has the same dubious design choices that no one would ever put in a single-player game, like the need to recover your body after you die. What a casual. Well, I guess I'll give him that one for the vanilla state of the game, since there were so few graveyards. It really could take like 20 minutes to get to your corpse sometimes. I remember the worst was the corpse run for the Molten Core for the Alliance. You'd spawn in the Northern Searing Gorge, and directly on your way back was a pit that dropped you into a giant labyrinthine mine system, and if someone fell in here, it was guaranteed that they would get lost and need someone to come back and guide them out. And remember, there wasn't a teleport to the Spirit Healer button back then. So I suppose I'll concede this point. They go on to say that there is some tedious busy work and lots of running from point A to B, though mounts, zeppelins, and flight paths help somewhat. Watch out for this guy, he's as tough as he looks. Yeah, somebody's gonna need some stitches here in a second. And here we have some old pictures of some group play. Right here, I've traced their steps to this Blackrock Castle in the Red Ridge Mountains. You had a few elite quests here back in the day, hence the group. And this one is of course from the Dead Mines, which was the very first Alliance dungeon in the game. What makes World of Warcraft stand out is simply how well everything works. Its level of polish is off the charts. It's the feeling that Blizzard has analyzed every element of every existing game, pulled out the best ones, and then lovingly lavished an absurd amount of attention to their implementation. Now, I'm going way off track here, but when I talk about the feel of World of Warcraft's combat and how polished it is, I always use Star Wars: The Old Republic as an example. On the surface, this should have been an amazing game. An MMO in the Star Wars universe done right. It's the perfect setting for an MMO, with ample story, quests, and characters to work with, but the one giant gaping flaw that ruined the entire game for me was the combat. For me, it just didn't feel fun in the game. Instead of developing their own engine, they adopted the hero engine, which just didn't work out. Before every attack, your character would do a little animation before you got the actual damage. As a result, it made things seem sluggish and laggy, and it ruined the game for me and many others. It lacked the polish and smooth and fun combat that the World of Warcraft had, and in my opinion, it ultimately led it to its path of free-to-play. And not to pick on Star Wars here, but I also have to mention the Star Wars Galaxies again. A game I look back to very fondly, but the combat system and endgame design, it was questionable to say the least. As for the combat, it was this weird queue-based system where you selected the order in which you used your abilities. Very unorthodox and unpolished. You might be saying, well, of course, it's a game from 2003. You kind of have to expect that. Well, that's my entire point. World of Warcraft was just 1 year later in 2004, and the overall design, feel, and polish of the combat system was simply amazing. And not just the combat, the talent system, the spell system, the way dungeons and raids were set up, the loot system, and so on. The game had an absurd amount of polish at the time compared to most others, be it combat or otherwise. People often look for answers on just why Classic was looked upon so fondly, and one of the reasons is this level of polish it had compared to, yeah. Anyways, back to the article. It's like a greatest hits collection of the best features from every other game on the market. Other features of its own, like this revolutionary thing called the auction house, will become standard in every future game. Hey, Star Wars Galaxies had an auction house, and that was 2003. I called bullcorn on this article. Here they show a screenshot of the old auction house though. It was always fun to just look at this stuff on there. You couldn't afford it, but you could at least marvel in the shiny blue or purple color of the items and have something to work towards. Or visit eBay. World of Warcraft is the perfect game for new players, a sort of MMO for dummies. Again, just like my CGW video, back then World of Warcraft was extremely casual in comparison to the other juggernauts at the time, like EverQuest or Ultima Online, and yes, even Star Wars Galaxies. So I always find it funny whenever people say that the game caters to casuals now. It's always catered to casuals, ever since 2004. Oh, now here's what I like to see. It also does a superb job of making every race and class choice distinct. Particularly on the race front, today everything is more or less balanced with each other. Back then, the racials in the game were much more impactful and unique from each other, so much so that you'd try to get certain races for certain roles if you could. It wasn't necessary or a deal breaker by any means, but certain ones had these unique perks that synergized really well depending on your class and endgame activities. Dwarf priests were amazing since they got the Fear Ward spell, and orcs were amazing in PvP for their ability to resist stuns. Your strategy would change depending on what race the player picked, and that's something that I personally enjoyed. Balance makes things more fair, and that's good, but if you take it to the extreme, it also makes it more straightforward and dull, which shouldn't be the case for an MMO game in my opinion. Players have interesting choices for their character, and you rarely find people who've played for extended periods who are unhappy. Rogues and paladins are better than most hybrid characters. I'm not sure what that's about, but he goes on to say that almost every class has a well-defined role to play in a group. Every character feels special and can be played solo through much of the game. Again, another thing that's been whittled away for the sake of balance. Hunters were the ones who pulled the raid boss, only druids had battle reses, mages had the best CC and were the AoE kings. But now, for the sake of balance, everyone can fit every role. Everyone has a stun, a sprint, an oh crap button, a pew pew button, which does make things more fair, but also really straightforward. You want the game to be more balanced and fair, of course. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's not a 100% good thing. There are sacrifices with everything, and it'll be one of the more dividing aspects with Official Classic, I think. World of Warcraft isn't a hard game. In fact, you can make a compelling argument that it's quite easy. It rewards persistence as much as it does skill, which really isn't a problem for most players. Going back to that casual argument and comparing the game then and now, I always say that things such as leveling were harder certainly. More time consuming, yes, but also harder. But in the raiding scene, with the advent of mythic raiding, the game is much harder today. Huge strides in mechanics, and just how each boss brings a unique challenge to overcome. And on that remark of persistence versus skill, even though it wasn't out at that point, you could equate this to PvP then and now. Remember the old rank 14 system, where it was basically who could play the most or share their account, compared to the rated battlegrounds and arenas of today, where it's much more competitive and it requires more skill to climb to the higher ranks. I can confirm this, because I suck at PvP. You feel like Blizzard wants you to succeed. In keeping with that approach, there are minimal death penalties, mostly time and never experience, and it never feels like a grind. Oh boy, I definitely can't wait for the Official Classic to see how this quote holds up in today's MMO audience. It does a superb job of leading the player through its incredible world without making it feel linear. You explore and discover new cities. All of the people with quests are identified with a yellow exclamation point over their head. This removes the tedium of talking to every single person to find that one guy who will tell you what to do next. Now this is rather interesting, I thought, because it is something that I never actually realized. In those old school RPG games, like the old Final Fantasies, oftentimes to figure out where to go, you'd have to find that random person out of dozens that actually tell you what to do. And the other ones just have nothing useful to say and are just there for the scenery pretty much. Not having to talk to every single NPC to find the quests, of which there were barely enough to get to level 60, definitely wasn't the standard at the time, and has been something we've surely taken for granted all these years. And the sheer quantity of available quests, literally thousands, removes much of the tedium of killing mob after mob of monsters. I'm not so sure about that one. There were areas that you pretty much had to grind mobs unless you had extreme knowledge of the zones and all of their quests. There are also over 24 instance dungeons full of quests. These are self-contained adventures for your party alone, so you'll never run into anyone else. Some are mundane, such as the stockades, while others are spectacular, such as Gnomragon. Okay, I think our definition of spectacular may vary here, but I can respect it. On the topic of instance dungeons though, I did want to talk about this a bit more. Now, I never played EverQuest or Ultima Online, but in Star Wars Galaxies, most of the dungeons in the game were out in the world, meaning that you'd have to compete against other players for the bosses, which had lengthy respawn timers. For the most part, you crafted all of your gear in that game, so their loot was just crafting materials, and it created a huge supply versus demand problem, and you'd have people and even whole guilds camping these spawns for hours or even days, essentially locking out the rest of the server and creating a monopoly which they controlled. I hear that the same was true for EverQuest and Ultima Online, at least to an extent, so it's just another thing that we take for granted, I think. Just think about all the drama with the outdoor raid bosses, where people would steal kills or sabotage each other by dragging mobs over an active pole. But now, with Ragnaros, Nefarian, and so on, that would have been horrible, and thinking about it, I probably wouldn't have played it for very long. And I think a lot of you can say the same, right? While PvP is pointless, it does add a new dynamic to the usual gameplay. Remember, this was before any battlegrounds, honor system, or PvP gear. The fiction separates the player out of the gate, but the quests inevitably draw you to contested zones where the two sides mingle, such as the old Terran Mill and South Shore Hub, and we all know how that one turned out. And here, they also talk about World of Warcraft's art and how good the game looked back then. I already talked about this in the CGW video, so I'll skip over it this time, but I will share this line just because I like it so much. And despite all of the areas being unique, from the lush forests of Ashenvale to the stark desert beauty of the Barrens, from the majestic hills of Thunderbluff to the beautiful Loch Modan, all of these areas are unique, but it still manages to feel like a world. The game has loads of personality, with people yelling jokes and a tendency for them to strip and dance. I wonder if the author ever visited the Moonguard Goldshire Inn. Now that's an article I'd like to read. Whether the World of Warcraft is better than a Dark Age of Camelot or EverQuest isn't a fair question. Though, if you compare what it delivers today to all existing MMOs, it's amazing to see in how many ways it's already a superior game. If this is how it starts, what'll it be like after a year or two? If only he knew. However it turns out, one thing is clear, it's the best game of 2004. Alright, well, because I ramble so much, I think it's best that we cut it here. There is more that I will return to. This was just 2 pages, and we have 3 more to go, so in the next part, we'll cover the What's Next section, and preview some of those upcoming features that they teased earlier. If you have any old articles that you'd like me to read, particularly during Classic, let me know. Thanks for watching the video, like it if you liked it, and I'll see you in part 2 soon. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.